The funny thing about fairy tales is that nobody ever tells you what happens when Cinderella doesn't want the castle. That thought crossed my mind the first time I saw Ethan Blackwood. At the time, he was just another man in an expensive suit walking through the front doors of the Westbrook Community Library on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had no idea his name would eventually appear on every news channel in America. I had no idea he controlled companies worth more money than I could imagine. And I definitely had no idea that meeting him would change the direction of my life. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows while I sorted returned books behind the circulation desk. It was nearly 5 o'clock, the quiet hour when parents picked up children from after-school reading programs and retirees settled into their favorite chairs with mystery novels. The smell of old paper and fresh coffee filled the building. To me, it smelled like home. I was 27 years old, earning just enough to pay rent on a small apartment and keep my aging Honda running. My life wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine, and I loved it. Mrs. Henderson, one of our regular visitors, waved from the history section. I waved back. A little boy named Caleb proudly carried a stack of books almost as tall as he was. His mother laughed as she followed behind him. Ordinary people, ordinary lives, the kind of lives most wealthy people never noticed. Then the front doors opened. A gust of cold air drifted inside. Everyone looked up for a moment. Not because they recognized him. Nobody did. It was something else. Some people carried a presence that entered a room before they spoke. This man had that. He was tall, dark blonde hair, gray eyes, perfect posture. The charcoal coat he wore probably cost more than my monthly rent. Yet he didn't look arrogant. He looked distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. He paused near the entrance and slowly scanned the library. His gaze moved across the bookshelves, the reading tables, the children gathered near the story corner. For a brief second, something softened in his expression. Then it disappeared. He started walking. Not toward the computers, not toward the information desk, straight toward the children's section. I frowned. Most adults who entered that area had kids with them. He didn't. Curiosity got the better of me. I watched from behind the desk as he stopped near a small bookshelf decorated with hand-painted stars. A little girl sitting on the floor looked up at him. He smiled politely. She smiled back. Then he crouched down and helped her pick up a book she had accidentally dropped. Such a small thing. So ordinary. Yet somehow it caught my attention. Wealthy executives weren't usually known for kneeling on library floors to help 7-year-olds. He stood and glanced around again. That was when our eyes met. Just for a second. Long enough for me to notice how tired he looked. Not physically tired. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. Then he nodded once and continued walking. I should have forgotten him right there. Just another visitor passing through on a rainy afternoon. But something about that brief look stayed with me. And as I watched him disappear between the shelves, I had the strange feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I forgot about him for almost 3 full hours. That was a personal record. Usually, strange encounters lingered longer in my mind. But the library was busy. A kindergarten class arrived for a reading tour. The printer jammed twice. Someone spilled hot chocolate near the reference desk. Real life had a way of pushing mysteries aside. Then, at 11:23, I found the envelope. It sat alone on a small reading table near the back windows where the man had been sitting the previous afternoon. Thick cream-colored paper. No name written on the outside. No markings. I almost carried it straight to Lost and Found. Almost. But something about its weight made me pause. It felt important. Inside were several documents held together by a simple silver clip. I only saw the first page before immediately closing it again. Numbers. Signatures. Corporate logos. Legal language. The kind of paperwork that screamed expensive. My stomach tightened. Whoever lost this would definitely come looking for it. I locked the envelope inside my desk drawer and went back to work. Around noon, the front doors opened. I looked up automatically. It was him. The same charcoal coat. The same calm expression. The same eyes that somehow looked exhausted even in daylight. He walked directly toward the circulation desk. Not hurried. Not worried. Controlled. Every step measured. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was deeper than I remembered. "I think I may have left something here yesterday." I folded my arms. An envelope? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Gone almost instantly. "Yes." "Can you describe it?" One eyebrow lifted slightly. "You are verifying ownership?" "Of course." For the first time, he smiled. A real smile. Small. Unexpected. Cream-colored envelope. Silver clip. For documents inside. I nodded. Wait here. When I returned with the envelope, he seemed genuinely relieved. Not emotional. Just relieved. Like someone recovering something far more valuable than money. Thank you, he said. Most people would have opened it. I opened it enough to know it was not mine. His eyes studied me carefully. You did not read it? No. Why not? The question caught me off guard. Because it was private. He looked almost confused by that answer. As if privacy was not a reason people commonly used anymore. Interesting, he said quietly. Interesting. Most people are curious. Most people probably have better gossip stories than library paperwork. That earned another smile. Slightly larger this time. Then something unexpected happened. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a business card on the counter. Thick cardstock. Elegant lettering. The kind that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. For your honesty, he said, I would like to make a donation to the library. I looked at the card, then at him, then back at the card. You think I returned your envelope for a reward? The smile disappeared. That was not my intention. Good. I slid the card back across the counter. Because we are not selling integrity today. For the first time since entering the building, Ethan Blackwood looked completely caught off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the library returned around us. Pages turning. Children laughing softly in the reading corner. The distant hum of the printer near the front desk. Ethan Blackwood glanced at the business card still resting between us, then slowly slipped it back into his coat pocket. Fair enough, he said. There was no irritation in his voice. No wounded pride. If anything, he seemed curious. You really thought I was trying to buy your honesty? I thought you were trying to put a price on it. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger. In thought. And there is a difference? A huge one. He leaned one hand against the counter. Explain it to me. I almost laughed. Nobody had ever asked me to explain basic human decency before. Returning something that belongs to someone else is normal. Normal is becoming rare. That does not make it valuable. Actually, he said quietly, that is exactly what makes it valuable. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. There was something strangely sincere about the way he said it. Like he genuinely believed it. Before I could respond, Mrs. Henderson appeared beside the desk holding 3 books against her chest. Grace, dear, are these due next Tuesday or Wednesday? I smiled immediately. Next Wednesday. Wonderful. Thank you. She noticed Ethan standing there and offered him a friendly nod before shuffling away. Ethan watched her disappear between the shelves. She knows your name. Most people here do. You know theirs too? Almost all of them. He looked around the building again. This time differently. Not as a visitor. As an observer. That must be difficult. Knowing people's names? Caring about that many lives. I blinked. I never thought of it as difficult. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but stopped himself. Instead, he glanced toward the children's section where Caleb was proudly reading aloud to his younger sister. A faint smile appeared. They seem happy here. They are. The building needs repairs. I sighed. You noticed that quickly. A section of ceiling near the east windows had been leaking for months. The carpet needed replacing. Half the computers were older than some of the teenagers using them. Budget problems? He asked. Community library problems. How much would it cost to fix everything? I laughed again. That is not how libraries work. Then how do they work? The question sounded genuine. That surprised me. Most wealthy people only asked questions when they already believed they knew the answers. One fundraiser at a time, I said. One donation box. One grant application. One book sale. We survive. He nodded slowly. Then his phone vibrated. The screen lit up. I caught only a glimpse of numbers and messages before he silenced it immediately. Whatever appeared there seemed important. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. Finally, he looked at the screen and exhaled. Not annoyed. Resigned. Like someone returning to a responsibility he could never fully escape. I should go. Probably. He gave a small nod. Grace. It was the first time he had used my name. Somehow it sounded different coming from him. Yes. Thank you for returning the envelope. You already thanked me. I know. For a second his expression softened. I just do not think many people would have. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. The doors opened. Cold afternoon sunlight spilled inside. And as he disappeared onto the sidewalk, I found myself wondering why a man who seemed to have everything looked so lonely. The following week passed quietly. At least on the surface. The library remained busy. Children filled the reading corner every afternoon. Volunteers sorted donated books in the basement. I processed returns, organized events, and tried to focus on everything except a certain man who had somehow become a recurring thought in the back of my mind. Then Tuesday arrived, the monthly board meeting. I sat at the long conference table with a paper cup of coffee growing cold beside me while our director reviewed the budget. The numbers were not good. They were never good. A section of the roof still needed repairs. 2 computers had finally stopped working altogether. The literacy program was operating on funds that might not last through the summer. Nobody complained. That was the strange thing about community work. People simply kept going, even when resources ran thin, even when the odds looked impossible. After the meeting ended, I stayed behind to help stack chairs. Outside, gray clouds covered the sky. Rain threatened again. My phone buzzed with a text from my landlord reminding tenants about scheduled maintenance. Normal life. Predictable life. The kind I understood. Across town, Ethan Blackwood lived in a world I could barely imagine. I did not know it then, but while I was shelving books that afternoon, he was standing inside a glass conference room 40 floors above Manhattan. A room larger than my entire apartment. A room overlooking the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Men and women in tailored suits filled the table around him. Charts glowed across giant screens. Numbers moved. Markets shifted. Decisions involving millions of dollars were discussed as casually as grocery lists. Yet according to what I would later learn, Ethan barely heard any of it. His attention drifted. Again and again. Back to a library. Back to a conversation. Back to a woman who had handed back a business card without hesitation. That evening, just before closing, a delivery arrived. A young courier entered carrying a sealed package. "For Grace Carter," he said. My stomach immediately tightened. I signed for it and waited until he left before opening the envelope. Inside was a letter. Thick white paper. Elegant handwriting. No company logo. No business branding. Just a simple message. "Grace, thank you for the conversation. You were right. Respect and gratitude are not the same thing. Enclosed is information about a grant program that may help your library. No obligations. No meetings. No expectations. Ethan." I stared at the page for several seconds. Then I noticed a second document. It was not a donation. Not a check. Not an offer. It was a list of nonprofit grant opportunities available to community libraries across the state. Public information. Carefully researched. Organized. Useful. Nothing more. Nothing less. I sat down slowly. Outside, rain finally began tapping against the windows. Somewhere in Manhattan, one of the busiest men in America had apparently spent part of his day researching library grants. And for the first time since meeting him, I realized something important. Ethan Blackwood was not trying to impress me. He was trying to understand me. And somehow that felt far more dangerous. For the next few days, I told myself the letter meant nothing. People sent useful information all the time. Grant applications were not romantic gestures. Research was not a declaration of interest. And yet I found myself reading through the packet more than once. Not because I needed to, because I was trying to understand the person who had assembled it. Nobody had ever done something quite like that for me before. The following Friday, the library hosted its monthly family reading night. It was my favorite event of the month. Folding chairs filled the community room. Parents arrived carrying toddlers. Teenagers pretended they were too old to enjoy stories while secretly listening anyway. The scent of popcorn drifted through the building. It felt warm, familiar, safe. Around 6:30, I was helping Caleb choose a science book when the front doors opened. I looked up automatically. My heart did something strange. Ethan had returned. This time he was dressed more casually. Dark jeans, a navy sweater, no expensive coat. No visible signs that he belonged in boardrooms and financial magazines. For a moment, he simply stood near the entrance watching the room. Children laughed. Volunteers moved between tables. Parents talked quietly over paper cups of coffee. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. "You came back?" I said when he approached the desk. Apparently I did. Looking for another lost envelope? Not today. There was amusement in his voice. I tried not to smile back. "Then what brings you here?" He glanced around. "Curiosity. About books. About this place." Before I could answer, A little girl rushed past carrying a stack of picture books and accidentally dropped two of them. Ethan immediately bent down to help her gather them. She thanked him and hurried away without recognizing who he was. He watched her disappear into the crowd. "Interesting," he said. "What is? Nobody here seems impressed by status." I laughed softly. "Most 8-year-olds are not reading business magazines." His smile appeared again. That smile was becoming increasingly dangerous. We spent the next hour talking between interruptions. About books. About community programs. About why libraries mattered. He asked questions that sounded simple, but somehow never were. How many children used the after-school programs? What happened to families who could not afford internet access at home? Why did volunteers keep showing up year after year? He listened carefully to every answer. Really listened. The way people rarely do. As the evening ended, parents began gathering coats and backpacks. Volunteers stacked chairs. The room slowly emptied. Ethan remained standing near the doorway. "You know," he said quietly, "I spent most of my life believing problems were solved with money. And now," his gaze moved across the room, across the shelves, across the worn carpet and aging furniture. "Now I think money might only be the easy part." For a second, neither of us spoke. The rain had started again outside. Soft drops tapping against the windows. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down. Something changed in his expression. Not fear. Not anger. Distance. The same distance I had noticed the first day we met. "Everything okay?" I asked. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Not exactly. Work? Something like that." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was considering saying more. Then he shook his head. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Ethan." I watched him leave through the glass doors and disappear into the rainy evening. What I did not know was that someone had been looking for him for nearly 2 hours. And whatever required the attention of Ethan Blackwood was important enough to make even a billionaire forget where he was supposed to be. The next Monday started with a surprise. I arrived at the library just before 8 in the morning, carrying a coffee that was still too hot to drink. The parking lot was nearly empty. The air smelled like rain. Everything seemed normal until I walked through the front doors and found 3 children standing in the lobby, staring at something with wide eyes. "Grace, you have to see this," Caleb whispered. I followed him toward the reading room. For a second, I thought I was looking at the wrong building. The old shelves along the north wall had been repaired. The broken reading lamps that had not worked in months were glowing softly. Several worn chairs had been replaced with identical models that looked almost new. Not expensive, not flashy, just fixed, useful, thoughtful. "What happened?" I asked. Our director emerged from her office carrying a clipboard. She looked as shocked as I felt. "Anonymous donor." "Anonymous." She nodded. "A local contractor volunteered labor over the weekend. Supplies were covered by someone who refuses to be identified." I already knew, or at least I suspected. The repairs were too specific. Whoever arranged them understood exactly what the library needed. Not luxury, function. The realization followed me throughout the day. By late afternoon, I finally found myself standing near the front windows looking out at the street. And almost as if the universe had been waiting for that moment, Ethan appeared. He crossed the sidewalk carrying an umbrella and stepped inside. The familiar calm entered with him. "Did you do this?" I asked before he could even say hello. He blinked once. "Do what?" "The repairs." His expression remained completely neutral. Too neutral. Interesting accusation. "Ethan." A faint smile appeared. "I may have spoken to someone." I folded my arms. "You promised no donations." "There were no donations." "You paid for repairs." "Technically, I connected people who wanted to help with people who knew how to help." I stared at him. That sounds suspiciously like billionaire logic. That made him laugh. A real laugh this time. Warm and genuine. The sound surprised both of us. Then his gaze drifted toward the reading room where children sat working on homework assignments. Several waved at him. To my amazement, he waved back. "They like you," I said. "I am not sure why. Maybe because you talk to them like they matter." He became quiet. Very quiet. His eyes followed Caleb as the boy proudly showed another student a science project. "They do matter," Ethan said softly. The certainty in his voice caught my attention. Before I could respond, a black sedan pulled up outside the library. The driver remained inside, waiting. Ethan noticed it immediately. His expression shifted. The distance returned. The invisible wall I had seen before. "You have somewhere to be," I said. "Apparently." But he did not move. Not right away. Instead, he looked around the library one more time. The repaired shelves. The children reading. The volunteers organizing books. The ordinary little world that somehow kept drawing him back. Then he looked at me. Grace. Yes. This place changes people more than you realize. And for the first time, I had the strange feeling he was not talking about the children at all. After that day, Ethan started appearing more often. Not every day. Not enough to seem intentional. Just enough that I began expecting to see him. Sometimes he arrived with a book in his hand. Sometimes he sat quietly near the back windows reading while children worked on homework assignments around him. Other times he simply walked through the building, observing everything with the same careful attention he seemed to give the rest of the world. What fascinated me most was how quickly the children accepted him. They did not care about his tailored clothes or the expensive watch he occasionally forgot to hide beneath his sleeve. They only cared that he listened. One afternoon, I walked into the reading room and found Ethan sitting at a small table designed for elementary school students. His knees looked awkward beneath the tiny surface. Across from him sat Caleb holding a model rocket made from cardboard tubes and construction paper. The fuel system would never work, Caleb explained seriously. Ethan nodded with complete sincerity. That is a valid concern. I think I need better materials. What kind? Something stronger. Ethan thought for a moment. Engineering begins with solving problems. Caleb looked impressed. Very impressed. I stood in the doorway trying not to laugh. When Caleb finally ran off to join his friends, Ethan leaned back in the tiny chair. You are smiling. You are discussing aerospace engineering with a 10-year-old. He asked good questions. You answered them like he was presenting to NASA. Ethan glanced toward the children. Nobody becomes confident by being treated like a child forever. The answer stayed with me longer than it should have. Later that evening, after the library closed, we found ourselves organizing returned books together. Outside, the sky had turned deep blue. Streetlights reflected against damp pavement from an earlier rainstorm. The building felt unusually quiet. Peaceful. Can I ask you something? I said. Ethan slid a book onto a shelf. Of course. Why do you keep coming back? For a second, he looked genuinely surprised by the question. That is a fair question. And he studied the rows of books before answering. Because nobody wants anything from me here. I blinked. That cannot be true. It is. His voice was calm. Matter of fact. Most conversations in my life begin with expectations attached to them. Money. Sometimes. Business. Usually. He gave a faint smile. Occasionally both. I leaned against the shelf. And here, Ethan looked around the library. At the worn carpet. The old books. The bulletin boards covered with community announcements. Here people only seem interested in whether I return books on time. I laughed. He smiled in return. Then the smile faded slightly. It is refreshing. The honesty in those two words caught me off guard. For a brief moment, the billionaire disappeared. The successful executive disappeared. All that remained was a man who sounded tired of carrying expectations. A man searching for somewhere he could simply exist. Then his phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Ethan looked down at the screen. This time he could not hide his reaction. Concern flashed across his face. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. Everything okay? I asked quietly. He locked the screen and slipped the phone away. I am not sure. For the first time since meeting him, Ethan Blackwood looked uncertain. And somehow that worried me more than anything else. The next few days felt different. Not because anything obvious had changed. The library still opened at 8. Children still filled the reading room after school. Volunteers still argued over the best way to organize donated books. On the surface, life continued exactly as it always had. Yet something underneath had shifted. Ethan seemed distracted. More than usual. He still visited. But there were moments when I would catch him staring out a window or glancing at his phone with an expression I could not quite read. One Thursday afternoon, I was sorting returned books when Mrs. Henderson hurried toward the desk carrying a newspaper. Grace, have you seen this? She asked. Seen what? She opened the business section and pointed to a photograph that covered nearly half the page. My stomach dropped. There he was. Ethan. The same gray eyes. The same calm expression. The headline stretched across the top of the page in bold letters. Blackwood Industries announces record expansion. Beneath it was a long article describing acquisitions, investments, and numbers so large they barely seemed real. Billions of dollars. International projects. Corporate influence reaching across entire industries. I stared at the photograph, then at the article, then back at the photograph. Grace, Mrs. Henderson asked, "Are you all right?" I forced a smile. Fine. But I was not fine. Not even close. The newspaper suddenly felt heavier in my hands. Because in that moment I realized something. Ethan had never actually told me who he was. Not really. He had answered questions carefully, shared pieces of himself, listened to stories about the library. Yet somehow the most important detail had remained hidden in plain sight. That evening he arrived just before closing. The moment I saw him walk through the doors, I knew he could tell something was wrong. "Grace," he said, "you look upset." I held up the newspaper. For the first time since I had met him, Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not nervous, not embarrassed. Uncomfortable. "You are Ethan Blackwood," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Yes." "The Ethan Blackwood." Another pause. "Yes." I laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because I did not know what else to do. "You own companies." "A few." "A few." I pointed at the article. "This says you employ tens of thousands of people." "Approximately." "And you never thought to mention that." Ethan looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. I thought it would change things. It did change things. The honesty surprised both of us. Silence settled between us. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the parking lot. Inside, the library felt suddenly smaller. Or maybe the distance between our worlds felt larger. "Grace," he said carefully, "I never lied to you." "No." I folded the newspaper. "You just left out enough information to make the truth feel different." His jaw tightened slightly. Not defensive, regretful. And for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwood, I wondered whether I knew him at all. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in almost 2 years. Not because I was ill, because I needed space to think. My apartment felt smaller than usual. The rain outside painted silver lines across the windows, while a half-finished cup of coffee sat untouched on my kitchen table. I kept replaying every conversation I had ever had with Ethan. Every question, every answer, every moment. Had he manipulated me? No. Had he lied? Not exactly. Yet the feeling remained. Like I had been reading a book with half the pages missing. Around noon, my phone buzzed. One message. "Ethan, I am sorry." I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before locking my phone and setting it face down. An hour later, another message appeared. "I should have told you sooner." I did not reply to that one either. By evening, I made a decision. I needed distance. The next day, I returned to work, but something had changed. Every shelf, every reading table, every repaired lamp reminded me of him. Worse, the children kept asking where he was. "Is Mr. Ethan coming today?" Caleb asked while organizing science magazines. "I do not know," I answered. It was the truth. 3 days passed. Then 4. Ethan never appeared. The library continued moving forward without him. Story hour happened on schedule. Volunteers sorted donations. Families checked out books. Life went on exactly as it always had. Yet I noticed his absence everywhere. The empty chair near the back windows. The quiet corner where he liked to read. The questions he used to ask. By the end of the week, I found myself glancing toward the entrance every time the doors opened. That realization annoyed me more than I wanted to admit. Friday evening arrived with clear skies for the first time in days. We closed early for a maintenance inspection. As I locked the front doors, Mrs. Henderson approached carrying a mystery novel beneath her arm. She studied me carefully. "You miss him." I nearly dropped my keys. "What?" "The tall gentleman." "I do not know what you are talking about." "Grace." She smiled knowingly. "I am 73 years old. I know exactly what I am talking about." Heat rushed to my face. "This is not about that." "Then why do you keep looking at the door?" I had no answer. Mrs. Henderson patted my arm gently before walking away. That night, sleep refused to come. Around 10:30, I finally gave up and went for a walk. The city felt calm beneath the glow of streetlights. Cool air drifted through the trees lining the sidewalk. I wandered without a destination until I reached the small public park near downtown. And that was when I saw him. Ethan sat alone on a bench beneath an oak tree. No driver. No assistants. No expensive office. Just a man staring at the reflection of city lights dancing across a pond. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Ethan slowly stood. His expression revealed something I had never seen before. Relief. genuine relief. Like he had been searching for something and unexpectedly found it. Grace, he said quietly. My heart betrayed me immediately, because despite everything, hearing my name in his voice still felt like coming home. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The city seemed to fade into the background. Cars passed in the distance. Water rippled softly across the pond. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. None of it mattered. Ethan stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, looking at me as though he was afraid I might disappear if he blinked. What are you doing here? I finally asked. A faint smile touched his face. I could ask you the same question. I asked first. He nodded. Fair. His gaze drifted toward the water. I come here when I need to think. And what are you thinking about? That question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he looked almost amused. Lately, he exhaled slowly. You. My heart immediately decided to become uncooperative. I looked away first. That is not a real answer. It is the only honest one. Silence settled between us again. Dangerous silence. The kind that made it impossible to hide behind ordinary conversation. I sat down on the bench. After a brief hesitation, Ethan sat beside me, leaving enough space to feel respectful and somehow not enough space to feel distant. I was angry, I admitted. I know. You should have told me. I know that too. There was no argument in his voice. No attempt to defend himself. Just acceptance. Somehow that made everything harder. Why did you not? I asked. Ethan watched the reflection of city lights moving across the water. Because for the first time in a very long time, somebody was talking to me without knowing who I was. You mean without knowing how much money you have? That too. He smiled faintly. Then the smile disappeared. But mostly because you treated me like a person. The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. I wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. Simpler. Instead, I found myself remembering every conversation. Every book recommendation. Every afternoon spent watching him talk to children as though their opinions mattered. You are a difficult person to stay mad at, I muttered. That earned a quiet laugh. I am usually told the opposite. We sat there for a while, watching the water. Eventually, Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen was filled with notifications. Emails. Messages. Missed calls. He locked it again without reading any of them. That seems important. Probably. You are ignoring it. Also true. I shook my head. You are unbelievable. I have heard that before. His expression softened as he looked at me. Then something shifted. Something heavier. More serious. Grace, there is something happening at work. The way he said it immediately caught my attention. What kind of something? Ethan hesitated. For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely uncertain. The kind that may change everything. The breeze moved through the trees overhead. Leaves rustled softly in the darkness. I stared at him, suddenly aware that whatever world Ethan belonged to had finally followed him here. And judging by the look in his eyes, it was not finished with him yet. The following week felt like watching a storm gather beyond the horizon. You could not see the damage yet, but you could feel the pressure in the air. Ethan disappeared into his world. Meetings, flights, conference calls. Entire days passed without seeing him at the library. Yet somehow his absence felt louder than his presence ever had. News articles began appearing everywhere. Business channels discussed negotiations worth billions of dollars. Financial analysts debated whether Blackwood Industries was about to make the largest acquisition in company history. Even I could not avoid it. Screens displayed his photograph. Newspapers mentioned his name. Reporters speculated about outcomes that sounded impossibly large. Meanwhile, I spent my days helping children find books about dinosaurs and planets. The contrast felt almost absurd. One Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was shelving returns. A simple message. Ethan, coffee tonight. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before answering. Yes. We met at a small cafe 3 blocks from the library. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where students worked on laptops and exhausted parents survived on caffeine. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late. Not because he was careless. Because he looked exhausted. Truly exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes. Shoulders carrying invisible weight. He smiled when he saw me, but even that seemed difficult. You look terrible, I said. He laughed softly. That is not the greeting I expected. I believe in honesty. Clearly. We ordered coffee and found a quiet corner table. For a while neither of us discussed business. We talked about books. About Caleb's latest science project. About Mrs. Henderson accidentally returning the wrong mystery novel. Normal things. Ordinary things. I realized Ethan needed that more than coffee. Then his phone rang. He silenced it. 30 seconds later it rang again. Then again. Finally, I pointed at the device. You should probably answer that. Ethan stared at the screen. Probably. You are not going to. No. Why? His eyes met mine. The answer arrived instantly. Because I am tired of every conversation being about money. The honesty caught me off guard. He looked down at his untouched coffee. Do you know what everyone keeps asking me? I shook my head. Whether the deal is worth it. His smile held no amusement. Nobody asks what it costs. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. And what does it cost? Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked out the window toward the darkening street. Time. Relationships. Trust. Sleep. Entire years of your life. His voice remained calm. Yet every word sounded personal. Deeply personal. For the first time, I began understanding why success looked so lonely on him. Then his phone vibrated again. This time he picked it up. He listened for less than 20 seconds. Said almost nothing. Then ended the call. When he looked back at me, something had changed. The uncertainty was gone. Replaced by decision. Grace, he said quietly. I have a choice to make. Outside, headlights moved across the rain-soaked pavement. Inside, the cafe suddenly felt very still. And in that moment, I knew whatever choice stood before Ethan Blackwood was about to change both of our lives. For the next 48 hours, I heard nothing from Ethan. No messages. No calls. No unexpected visits to the library. The silence felt strangely loud. News coverage intensified. Financial networks spoke endlessly about the pending acquisition. Analysts predicted historic growth. Investors celebrated. Commentators described it as the opportunity of a lifetime. According to everyone watching from the outside, the decision seemed obvious. Then Monday morning arrived. I was helping organize a literacy event when my phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the screen. Can we meet after work? Ethan. My heart immediately answered before my brain could object. That evening, I found him waiting outside the library. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Streetlights glowed softly above the sidewalk. Ethan stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking calmer than I had seen him in weeks. Tired, but calm. We walked without a destination. Just two people moving through the quiet streets while the city settled into evening. Finally, I stopped. What happened? Ethan looked up at the darkening sky. I made my choice. I waited. The acquisition is over. For a moment, I thought I misunderstood him. Over. He nodded. I walked away. I stared at him. You walked away from the deal every news channel in America has been talking about. Yes. Why? Ethan laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the answer seemed obvious to him now. Because somewhere along the way I realized I was measuring success with the wrong ruler. We continued walking. The city lights reflected in shop windows as people hurried past carrying groceries and takeout containers. Ordinary lives. Ordinary evenings. The kind of moments Ethan once seemed too busy to notice. Do you know what everyone kept telling me? He asked. That it was the opportunity of a lifetime. And was it? Ethan considered the question. Maybe. He looked at me. But opportunities are not always worth their price. Something shifted inside me as he said it. Not because of the money involved. Not because of the headlines. Because for the first time, I understood what the choice had truly cost him. Walking away meant disappointing people. Ignoring expectations. Choosing uncertainty when certainty was available. It was not a business decision. It was a personal one. Are people angry? I asked. Ethan smiled. Some are confused. And the rest? The rest think I have completely lost my mind. That made me laugh. He smiled in return. Then his expression softened. Grace, before I met you, I thought every problem could be solved by working harder, earning more, building something bigger. His eyes held mine. Steady, honest. You showed me there are things money cannot create and success cannot replace. The world seemed unusually quiet. Traffic moved in the distance. Leaves rustled overhead. Everything else faded. What happens now? I asked. Ethan looked ahead toward the glowing windows of the library, toward the place that had changed both of us. For the first time in a very long time, he said quietly, I think I finally get to find out. The months that followed did not look anything like a fairy tale. There were no castles, no magical transformations, No sudden shortcuts to happiness. Life simply continued. The library still opened every morning. Children still raced toward the reading corner after school. Mrs. Henderson still returned books 2 days late and insisted it was everyone else's fault. The difference was that Ethan became part of that world. Not as a donor, not as a billionaire, as Ethan. Some afternoons, he helped students prepare for scholarship interviews. Other days, he sat with Caleb discussing increasingly complicated science projects that somehow involved rockets, solar panels, and enough imagination to power an entire city. The children adored him. The volunteers trusted him. And somewhere along the way, he stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes. One winter evening, nearly a year after we first met, I stood near the front windows watching snow fall across the parking lot. The library was closed. The lights were dim. Ethan was helping stack chairs after a community event, a task nobody had asked him to do, a task nobody expected him to do. Yet there he was, moving chairs across the floor with complete seriousness. "You know," I said, "a year ago you probably had people who did this for you." Ethan looked up. "I still do." "Then why are you doing it yourself?" He smiled. "Because it needs to be done." The answer made me laugh. It also made me realize how much he had changed. Not because he had given things up, because he had finally discovered what mattered enough to keep. Later that night, we stepped outside together. Fresh snow covered the sidewalks. The world seemed quieter beneath the glow of streetlights. We stood there for a moment watching flakes drift through the air. Neither of us felt any need to fill the silence. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Ethan glanced at me. "Regret what?" "Walking away from everything." He thought about it for a second. Then he shook his head. "I did not walk away from everything." His gaze moved toward the library behind us, toward the warm windows glowing against the winter darkness, toward the place where our story had begun. I walked toward something better. My heart felt full in a way that was difficult to explain. Because the truth was simple. Ethan had entered my life believing success was measured by numbers, by acquisitions, by growth charts and headlines. But somewhere between a lost envelope and a community library, he learned a different lesson. And so did I. I learned that people are not defined by the world they come from. They are defined by the choices they make once they know better. Snow continued falling around us as Ethan reached for my hand. Warm, steady, real. And standing there beneath the winter sky, I finally understood something. The greatest risk he ever took was never a business deal. It was allowing himself to become the kind of man who valued people more than power. And in the end, that was the decision that changed everything.